Hey everyone, hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Shelly and today I'm going to be wrapping up all of the books that I read in February. And for it being such a short month, I actually read quite a few books. I finished up several books and I feel like in February, you were really seeing the range in which I read. So kind of intense, to be honest with you. So I have some middle grade books. I have some general fiction. One of those fiction books is actually a mystery book, which is really unlike me. I have a couple of non-fiction books and a handful of picture grade books, or picture books. Okay, so let's just get started. I'm a little bit at a loss as to where to start, so I'm actually going to start with nonfiction. So I picked up and read Ducks by Kate Beaton. This Ducks made it onto quite a few best of nonfiction lists of last year, and that's where it really hit, like, it fell on my radar. What is it? Like, it hit my consciousness. I don't know. I knew about this book only because of the best of lists that I follow. 10 best books from the New York Times or Publishers Weekly or even Steve Donahue's blog. I'm just really interested in best of, and this made it onto a bunch of those lists. And so I picked it up and read it. I actually buddy read it with my friend Fraser. So Kate Beaton is a Canadian who is from Nova Scotia, I believe, and she, right after college, decided to work in the oil sands. It was very financially motivated, and the oil sands work is industrial, sort of a man's world, so to speak. This was some years ago, a couple of decades ago, I believe. It was maybe in the early 2000s. That she ended up doing this, and she decided to go for this kind of job because it paid a lot of money, and she had student debt and she wanted to pay off her student debt, and so she ended up she ended up working in this very male driven atmosphere, and there she had a lot of unpleasant experiences and a lot of misogyny going around. Part of it was behavior that I think was allowed, and part of it is because she was around a lot of men. They were the ones in power, and they didn't really nip the comments or the really the ideology of men are in charge and are allowed to say what they want to say in the bud at all. And so it was just behavior that was really kind of accepted and allowed, and so she really suffered from that. So what I thought the some of the book is very Canadian, and like I know that. Like, it's a super Canadian book. It talks about provinces that I've never really even heard of or know about, and I think some of it is the audience. The audience is the Canadian reader. However, I didn't love it. I feel like this is a topic that I could really get behind, that I could really understand, and even from my own experiences in the work world, as a woman moving through the world, that there are certain things about unchecked male behavior that goes on, and that is not okay. And I feel like she does a really good job illustrating that and explaining that and understanding sort of that was her experience. However, I just felt like there was a lot that was not great about the book. The transitions were really abrupt and sometimes disorienting. I really felt like in this format you can get a lot of interiority, like how she felt, and really go deep inside of her feelings and understand how she's processing these experiences. There wasn't a lot of that. And so it felt a bit one note. It felt like she was just constantly having these very unpleasant experiences, and that ultimately made up her time at the oil sands. There wasn't a lot about what the work was necessarily like, or why this industry was so profitable. there was just more, it left me with more questions than answers. Like, how did you feel during this experience? How did you cope? There wasn't a lot of that, except for that maybe she didn't cope well. So it was, and then also I didn't love her artistic style. Gosh, so this was not really the most successful read for me. But I don't know. I'm curious as to what Kate Beaton will do when she ends up, what her career will end up shaping up like. I am interested in her comic strip, Hark a Vagrant, because there were moments where she was quippy and funny, and I liked that. But overall, this really wasn't a very successful read for me. I scooched to the side a tiny bit because the next book I listened to, and it's a book in that it's being bound up as a book with fancy introductions, but really it is a document, a US document. And it is the January 6th report. It is what the special committee in the US put together as to how the insurrection on January 6, 2021, how it happened, how we got there as a country, and how it was the fuel that led, or that stoked the fire that ended up being a really important and traumatic and odd event. We're really starting with the hard hitters, and then maybe I'll back off and like it'll be a lot more pleasant later on in this video. But the insurrection, so how the insurrection came to be in the US. So if you don't know, what happened is that there were quite a few extremists that ended up taking over the Capitol during the counting, the sort of ceremonial counting of the votes at the US Capitol, trying to stop that, trying to make Donald Trump, have him continue to be president for, the next X amount of years. We don't know if they were successful. And they were there planning, they stormed the Capitol, and a lot of them were planning on, doing harm to Mike Pence, who was the vice president at the time. So from this document, I really was able to understand what happened on the back end of things. So during the election of 2020, and which happened on November, the voting day on November 6th, from November 6th until January 6th, there was a lot of confusing reports going on in the US at that point. A lot of people were either being fired or quitting from the Trump administration. The transition, there was supposed to be a peaceful transition of power that happens, from the first 20 days in January. All of that starts to go down, especially after the election is called. And instead, what was happening was that a lot of Donald Trump's legal counsel was either being fired or quitting. This is what the news was reporting. And that Donald Trump kept on saying that the election was stolen. That even though Joe Biden had won the election in the US, that Donald Trump continued to promote and declare that the election was stolen and that votes were being miscounted, or that voting machines weren't working. And what this report really showed me was the behind the scenes of what was happening, why people were quitting. A lot of people were quitting because they did not believe that the election was stolen, and they didn't believe in a president that was trying to push this message out. That was a complete lie. It's actually called the Big Lie now. And so the report was talking about the key figures that were both supporting and fueling Donald Trump's message. It was a lot about Donald Trump and his actions and the way that he used his power to push the big lie. And it was about people who ultimately stood up to Donald Trump saying, like, this has gone too far. So it was really interesting getting the back end of it all, the behind the scenes, because at that time I was watching a ton of news, and the news was reporting that Donald Trump, is saying that the election is stolen, and that all of a sudden, like William Barr quit, like all of a sudden so-and-so resigned, all of a sudden, and so you're finding out why they resigned. They obviously spoke to the special committee who put together this report, saying they reported on the fact that, like, this was their breaking point. This was when they knew they couldn't work for Donald Trump anymore. it was really fascinating. It was really fascinating. And I listened to this. I really took my time with it. And it was really interesting. If you end up doing the audiobook, I did the New Yorker version of the audiobook, and every major section has a different narrator, which is really wonderful because it feels like a chorus of people telling you what happened and how these events transpired. And it felt like a collective voice rather than one person's opinion, which I think was really effective in terms of all of the in terms of like representing the people who worked on this report. So it was really fascinating. It was really fascinating. And basically around after the insurrection and a few months afterwards, my news watching slowed down tremendously. And so this was a really good way to fill in what I didn't know. Of course, I'm like to my husband, I'm like, Ted, did you know this? And he's like, yeah, I knew that. Like, I'm like, oh, I didn't know. So, you know, it was really good for someone like, it was a beautiful and wonderful thing for someone like me who after around 2021 sort of stopped following the plot of what happened during the 2020 election. And so it was really a nice way to fill in what happened and to get a really like full picture of how this happened. It was really illuminating, and I could probably go on and on talking about it, but man, I'm like 15 minutes. Probably not for you all, but I'm like 15 minutes into this video, and I feel like all I've talked about are, you know, I've only talked about nonfiction books, but like I've talked about the hard-hitting stuff. So hard-hitting stuff away. I guess, you know what? It's the most important stuff, right? So I put the most important stuff at the beginning. I do think that the January 6th report is going to be one of the, if not the most important piece of media I consumed all year. I think it was really tremendously important for me as an American to keep up as to what's going on in the US government. It's just really, really, really incumbent upon me as my duty as an American to keep up with this kind of thing. And so I'm really glad that I listened to the report, and I really gleaned a lot of information from it. My favorite line is, it was a coup in search of illegal backing. It was a coup in search of a legal theory. Yeah, because they were really trying to take over the US government legally through loopholes. It was fascinating. It was fascinating. Okay, let's go to something a little more cheery. I've read quite a few middle grade books. Some of them I just finished this month. And I started last month, but I had quite a successful reading month in terms of middle grade. So I finished Holes. This is a reread for me by Louis Satcher. I read it with my work. And I liked it. The things actually, so I read this originally when I was like 11 or 12. I read it in a day. It was like a thing. And the things that I didn't like about it actually resurfaced as myself now, like decades later, as I reread this. I was like, the things I didn't like about the book stuck with me even as I did a reread of it. So what I didn't like about it back then and what I didn't like about it now was that this Holes, the whole timeline thing, I feel like gets a little bit muddy. Like, so there's a contemporary timeline, one in like present day, I would say, or in the 90s when this was released. And then there is a timeline of what happened 100 years ago. And the way the two converge and come together is, you know, it's just okay. If you don't know, there was a movie on this, but if you don't know this story, it's about this kid Stanley who gets sent away to a camp as a punishment for a crime that he didn't commit. And at this camp, he has to dig holes, and then you realize that they're digging holes because there's possibly hidden treasure, and there's a connection to Stanley's past and those in the camp, their past, at this place called Camp Green Lake, which is not a Green Lake anymore. You know, and so he's just trying to figure out what's going on. And anyway, so there's the connection between the past and the present. And for me, the story is wonderful. It's very, you know, energizing. You want to know what happens. But the way the story comes together, the two storylines come together wasn't perfectly satisfying, which is how I felt when I was 12. And then I read, actually book one, this is book 2, but I read book 1 and 2 of Lightfall, which is the story of friendship. I found out about this book from Gloria Z. Thompson. She read these middle grade books, and it came up when I was interviewing her as some of her most surprising reads for the year. And so I picked up book 1, and I immediately had to pick up book 2. I loved it. I thought it was great. It was so adventurous, so fun, ultimately about friendship. The world building was lovely, and I love the art. So it is by Tim Probert. I don't have the first book with me because I lent it out to a young person who is in my life, and he was so excited about it. He was so excited about it. And then he recommended to me Amulet by... Oh, it was blurbed on the last one. Oh yeah, Kazu Kibuishi. Amulet, the middle grade graphic novel series. So I actually ordered the first book of Amulet, and I'm hoping to read it in the next couple of days. So kind of getting my middle grade March reading in. But this was just lovely. It was so much fun. Highly recommend if you're looking for a palate cleanser, a fun adventurous story, something with beautiful art. Highly recommend that. The next book I read is actually a young adult book. It could be for older middle grade students, and it is Ain't Burned All the Bright, and it's written by Jason Reynolds, and the artwork is by Jason Griffin. And this book it's interesting. It's sort of about, textual elements, and there's only a few words per page, just like with everything Jason Reynolds does. It is very rhythmic, and it is like really easy to get into a swing with his writing. So this is about a young person who is taking in and being affected by what was going on in 2020. So it's a young Black person. So it's about like identifying and understanding what happened to George Floyd. It's about, getting sick, with COVID, and having a mother and father, and it's like they're all in this house together, and they're living this experience together. And it's like the processing of those feelings, of living through these events. And it definitely has hope. Hope is the underlining message of it all. But as you read it, it's almost like I don't want to say an out-of-body experience, but it's like, you're just like taking in these words, these sounds of like what it could feel like being this young person and identifying with what's going on in the world, and being scared and trying to find hope through it all. And so yeah, it was a really interesting book. I could see why it was honored by the Caldecott, which is an American award that features, or like that looks at, the best children's art books, the art in children's books. You would think I don't talk about this kind of thing on my channel for that year. And so I could see why it really was honored for that award, because it has these like interesting textual elements that says a lot about how this person is feeling, how they are processing. And so I really liked it. I thought it was interesting. The 2 adult fiction books I read were wonderful. Both were fantastic. The first one was Daphne du Maurier's Jamaica Inn, which I read with the FOMO book club, which is ran by Jack, Alice, and Gemma. I'll leave all their information down below. They're 3 wonderful, incredible, amazing ladies, and they're running this book club because they feel like they're the last persons on earth to have read the books that they chose for their book club, and Jamaica Inn was one of them. Well, I hadn't read Jamaica Inn, and I read it with my friend George. We emailed back and forth about it a little bit, and yeah, he and I both agreed, and I will tell you now that Daphne du Maurier's writing is beautiful. Like, she really takes a setting and makes it feel quite alive. And for that, this is the English moors. And so you really get a sense of, and Jamaica Inn itself is a setting that's very sort of decrepit and alive, but maybe just barely, it's barely breathing. Yeah, and anyway, so it tells the story of Mary, who has gone off to live with her aunt and uncle, and they are some shady individuals, especially her uncle. And there she meets her uncle's brother, who she gets along with quite well, and she meets other characters and goes through some quite terrifying events. And somehow, you know, she gets through it all. It's a murder mystery. It's a mystery through and through. And I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. Half of it is because of du Maurier's writing. She's a brilliant writer. So for fans of Rebecca, Jamaica Inn, make this your next read. It's fantastic. Again, I scooched over to the side because I read this next book on my Kindle, and it is Bel Canto by Ann Patchett. I own several Ann Patchett books. And of course, the Up to No Good Book Club, which is a book club that meets offline, but a lot of us have channels here. I'll leave everyone linked down below. They chose her most famous work. Well, Ann Patchett, she's got such a fantastic career. She's Pulitzer Prize winning author. She's had several books, be well received by readers. So it's kind of hard to say which one is her most prolific, but or her most, prominent, her most featured, anyways, her most famous. So I read Bel Canto, and ultimately it is about a birthday party gone wrong. And at this birthday party, it is taken over by terrorists, and the members of the birthday party become hostages. And then from there, the story plays out in a very interesting way. I really loved it. I was very sucked in. I was shocked at how absurd and sometimes a bit humorous and light the reading felt, even though it was about a really serious situation. And I just loved Ann Patchett's writing. I'm so glad, because I own, again, several books by her, and I haven't read her yet, except for now I have. And it was just really good. It was just immensely readable, really immediately engaging. It was exactly what I needed when I picked it up. So just very glad about that. I will end with a couple of books, a couple of picture books that I really enjoyed. So I did a video, I think in January, about Carson Ellis, the illustrator Carson Ellis, and how much I loved her illustrations, and I did a deep dive into her work. And from that video, there was quite a few recommendations. And so one of them was Queen of the Cave by Julia Sarda. And this is quite a dark picture book, but it was great. It was great. It was, in a weird way, it was like a dark fairy tale. It had almost one of the Grimm's Brothers fairy tale aspect to it. So not a story that is supposed to be happy, but it worked. It was really cool, and the illustrations are fantastic. I mean, look at that. Look at that. This little character right here, I was obsessed. I was obsessed with their little outfit. It's a little bit weird. It's a little bit off the beaten path, and it really just was everything I wanted and more. It was so good. I really enjoyed this book. If I'm remembering correctly, this was a recommendation by Gloria Z. Thompson, and I'm so glad that she recommended it, because this was it was so good. So good, guys. Another recommendation that came out of that Carson Ellis video is Dear Little One by Nina Layden and Melissa Castrillion. This was just, I like the illustrations more than I like the story, but there's this focus on the natural world and on bugs, and I love bugs. It was beautiful. Isn't this gorgeous? I'll show you the insides. I mean, look at those end papers. Isn't that just yummy? How gorgeous is this? This is just gorgeous. Oh my gosh. Isn't this just so beautiful? Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm gonna stop saying how beautiful something is. Me and picture books, I just love it all. Another book that was recommended, I believe, by Deea at Novel Idea. I'll leave her channel link down below. And it's The Year I Didn't Go to School, but mostly I think it was her that recommended Giselle Porter, the illustrator. And I liked the illustrations, but not quite, again, look at amazing end papers. Look at that. Not quite as, I didn't feel quite as passionate about these illustrations as I did the previous 2 books I've showed you. This book is about a young girl. It's actually about Giselle, so it's a nonfiction picture book. It's about Giselle, who spent a year traveling around Europe with her parents, doing a sort of an eccentric or off-kilter act. They like drove a bus and did a performance, like a, you know, they were a performing family in Europe for a year, and it's about that year. So interesting, obviously a very eclectic family. And yeah, she just explains her time there. I did quite like the book, but I just didn't love it. And then finally, I have the lists, which I don't know who recommended this. I should have gone back, but it's by Kyle McClear and it's illustrated by Julia Sarda. It might have been that Julia Sarda was recommended to me, and then I just ended up getting all of her books. But it is about a family who is obsessed with list making. Aesthetically, this is totally in line with the things that I love. This, this book in particular reminds me quite a bit of Carson Ellis, and it's all those muted kind of icky colors that are just, oh, I love it so much. I love it so much. I love the way everyone is dressed. I love the attention to detail of the backgrounds. I was thinking that clearly Julia Sarda or whomever helped put this book together is a fan of Wes Anderson, because this feels like a Wes Anderson story in a book. Like if you like the aesthetic of Wes Anderson and you're like, I really want a children's book that looks like something Wes Anderson would have illustrated or would approve of, like a Wes Anderson approved illustrated picture book, this is your book. It's so good. It was so good. It was such a pleasure to read. I'm sad to have to give it back. I just loved it. And again, it just reminded me quite a bit of Carson Ellis's work. One more, okay, one more. Isn't that just, oh, so good. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I clearly when I like something, okay? I just really loved it. And yeah, that's it. Okay, so that's everything that I read, more or less, I think. I think that's everything I read in February. It was a very successful reading month. I'm really enjoying all of my reading, from the picture books to the nonfiction reports and all of the fiction in between. I've just been loving all of it. And yeah, that's it from me. So tell me what you read this month. Let me know what was the best thing you read. Just let me know, okay? That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.